Leigh, thanks for joining me on the Pacey Performance Podcast. I think it was John Pryor that stitched you up, mentioning your name, saying that I just talk to you. So apologies for stalking you, but it's great to get you on.
Nice, pleasure to be here, mate. And it's always good to listen to some of the esteemed guests you have, apart from JP, of course. But it's a good stitch up as far as stitch ups go from him.
Good man. So I hear that, and this is from JP as well, that a fellow central defender. Is that right?
Me and you, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wannabes,
exactly.
yeah.
So what? Yeah, exactly. Wannabes, correct.
Yeah.
In my Twitter bio, it's failed footballer, so I'll stick with the failed bit.
I like that.
But
one.
yeah, so you were. Did you get very far in your career? What was the deal with the football career?
That's how I met JP. Actually, I was looking as a youth player in Australia in the system to beef myself up physically to play the game, and I always wanted to be a professional full-time footballer. Obviously in Australia you have like many shared interests in terms of sport, so you got like the rugby codes, AFL, football's in there, basketball, all the above. So it's not exactly what European football is, and the opportunities and the resources and stuff that go to it. But I was playing semi-professional up until 2.5, 3 years ago, and getting a little bit of money for it, but it wasn't paying the full-time wages. And when I look back on my playing time, I absolutely love the game. I still do. I still miss playing. I probably wasn't the most physically gifted, or I wouldn't do amazing things. But I'm proud of the work ethic that I had and the discipline that I had through meeting people at JP and other trainers and stuff like that when I was younger, that sort of instilled that in me, because I was never handed anything. I always had to fight for things in terms of talent and physical attributes and stuff like that. So I made JP always said I squeezed the lemon as hard as I could to get the performance juice out of me, and I just kept squeezing and kept squeezing. But yeah, through those lessons, that's why I am where I am now in terms of working in sports, and those experiences have shaped me a little bit. So I'm proud of my time, and I still got a little bit of technique to show some of the lads, I like to think. So I hope you're the same.
Yeah. Do you think that helps?
100%. Yeah. 100%.
No.
I mean, it's not like a prerequisite. I think also people who come from outside football, also like JP is a good example again, they bring massive value in terms of their insights from other sports and how those sports prepare and how they train, and different training cultures and stuff like that. But yeah, on the field and in sessions and in the gym and stuff like this, from a personal bias point of view, the feeling that you have from training to prep yourself before games, to build up your physical attributes, mentally preparing, being on the field, kicking a ball, knowing what it feels like in certain sessions and having certain injuries. For me, that experience is invaluable, because I know how it feels pretty much to get every injury from head to toe, and also to build your way back, and also to try to improve your performance. So I would hope, let's say, I have a unique perspective when it comes to performance, rehab, and football in particular. So working in football, I feel in my element.
Yeah, I think it often gets looked down upon from maybe people outside, or who haven't gone through or had a career like you have as a player. It gets looked down upon that maybe people get a bit of a helping hand who've come through and been a football person, let's say. But I do think it's massively undervalued from people who potentially haven't gone through it, because it does give so much, that empathy of just being able to understand what these guys are going through, maybe not at the same level, and even little things of, I know, just speaking from experience, if there was I was going through a rehab and it was progressing to striking the ball, Rob, get your boots on, would you mind just going out? Because they knew that I could pass a ball half decent, and this guy wouldn't be running all over the place, collecting the passes. So just little things like that can be such a help, can't it? Having someone around that's been through it and has half decent touch and a decent range of passing.
Yeah, 100%. No, I pride myself on sometimes like going out with boys who haven't been out with before in injuries or individual sessions, and then like seeing their surprise on their face or their reactions when like you ping a long ball to them and they're like, "What the hell? What's the?" Or you put on a pair of boots that's not like the old Copa Mundials that the rest of the staff get. Like, I've got my own boots, and they're like, "Oh, okay, where'd you get these from?" But it's like you said, that it's just that empathy and that awareness of like sort of what they're going through a little bit, and even little things like I said, it's not at that level, but playing high pressure games. Like, I've been in situations before games in the change room and stuff where you just feel butterflies and you feel nervous, and I think 99% of the population feels that. And when you're in a professional environment where there's 40,000 fans at a regular home game and stuff like this, and then you have bigger games, and these boys are paid a hell of a lot of money to play, but they're under so much pressure and they feel so much stress, sometimes anxiety and real negative emotions and stuff like that. So I think it's also helpful from a performance point of view, but outside the physical part and outside rehab also, that sometimes it's just good to have a conversation, just play a game or just switch off when you're traveling before a big European game or something like that, because it's what's going on in your head can really hinder you, or it can really protect you. I think I loved a quote from Anthony Joshua when I was playing, like, if there is no enemy within, then enemies from outside can't really harm you. You know what I mean? And that's sort of like flows into all of that mindset before games, also mindset with injuries and stuff like that. So I certainly value it, but I also see the benefit of someone else coming from outside with a different perspective.
No, absolutely. So you mentioned the rehab side of things a couple of times based on your injuries, saying that you've had probably every injury that these guys have gone through as well, who you're dealing with at the club. Just want to explain to us a little bit about your role at the club and how that's potentially progressed relatively recently based on previous podcast guests.
So about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, I came to Feyenoord Rotterdam through the head of medical there, Stijn Vandenbroucke, who's a close contact of mine, a friend that I'd met through Frans Bosch actually, and he offered me a role here as rehab physio, a dual role, rehab physio and performance coach. And at that time I was still playing football, but I was also working with JP and consulting a little bit in rugby and a couple of other sports and stuff. It was a kind of fork in the road, and I was like, look, the opportunity is just too good, and I think it's really tailored to my skill set and where I want to go. So I took it up, and I came here where I am now in Rotterdam, and worked here for 2 seasons. And then just recently, our head of performance, Rick Cost, who you had on the show previously, departed to go to the US. Who's also a legend, so shout out to Rick. But a position came up, and a Belgian guy from Genk, Ruben Peters, and I are now head of performance together. So I really love rehab, and I don't really like the word rehab, but the work that I did in terms of reconditioning and rehab, and mixing that with performance training, and sort of working in that gray spot, or the gray area, where I don't think enough solid work is done across the board in football and in all sports actually. So I still keep a bird's eye view on that sort of stuff, along with Stein and the medical stuff. But now a lot more performance oriented, and working with all the fit boys, let's say.
Yeah. So we're going to have a little chat around Frans and how you've interpreted some of his methods and integrated it into the work at Feyenoord, and potentially your own thoughts around it. When did you first get introduced to Frans and JP and the rest of the guys that kind of come with Frans and his methods?
Yeah, like I said, I met JP when I was like 11, 12 years old, and I trained with him as a junior, for my own personal development, all the way up until when I left to come here, basically. And through JP, I got to meet Frans when I was at university, actually. So it was quite early on in my tertiary education in Australia. Frans came out for some courses in Sydney, and we met, we did some work together, did some training sessions, and so I was exposed to JP is his own type of operator, and obviously Frans, people know his work reasonably well. But I was exposed to those two things like quite early on in the piece, while I also got my education in sports science and then physiotherapy in my 2 degrees at uni. So I was always a little bit skeptical about things that you get taught at university and whatnot. And then I was applying those methods to myself basically for a number of years in my would-be budding football career. And then also I started to work with JP a lot more in rugby, individual consults, a little bit of traveling and stuff like this. And so a mix of those two guys, I'm pretty blessed to have 2 mentors like that, because not many people are lucky enough to have one of them, but I've had 2 fantastic guys who've tutored me and got me to I hope a skill set level that is pretty solid.
You said there, and I picked up on that people know Frans's methods reasonably well.
As in, they know of his methods well, but actually implementing them is a whole different ball game. I don't know that many people, to be honest with you, who are taking the stuff on board and applying it really well. Obviously, when people ask, like Frans or myself or Toon Thomason, for example, who applies them really well, like JP is one of the first people that come to mind. And there is people in little pockets in different sports around the world and stuff who are quite clever in implementing those things. But if you're working in a professional organization, you also know that there is so many moving parts to what you do with players and how you construct your training week and games and stuff like that as well. So it was nice to work in a little niche area, like I said, like rehab, where you can apply these things with sort of a handful of other individuals, but also not be limited by them. Because if you go into a big organization and you want to implement something like Frans's work, which is inherently complex, you're going to obviously butt into people with other ideologies who may completely disagree, may not understand, may not want to understand. And then if you're trying to argue with someone, or you're trying to make it too complicated or too complex, it's just going to fall flat on its face, I think. So with the help of Stijn at Feyenoord, I think in terms of introducing that sort of framework and that style of training and philosophy, we started to ease our way into it with the playing group, get their buy-in first, because that's obviously massive, and then start to branch out from there, really. So it was complete coincidence, but I feel like it's still a work in progress, but I feel like it's been pretty successful to date.
Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what that framework actually is? And I'm sure that I've got loads of questions for you based on some of the readings that I've done around and listening to you on other podcasts as well. But it'd be nice for people just to get a bit of an understanding of that framework as a whole, or as a summary, and then we can use that as a bit of a jumping off point to dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose I say framework because it's more like you have Frans's body of work there that you borrow bits and pieces of at certain times. And I think myself also, I'd like to borrow from a bunch of different people's ideas and what I think is valuable, what I've used myself, and what I think is research-based or evidence-based, let's say. But yeah, like a good, I suppose giving you an example is probably the easiest way. But like in a nutshell, if we have like a playing group that we have at the moment, and we're looking at how they move and their what's important to them and what's important as footballers and for our head coach. A lot of stuff of this, by the way, is basically stolen or adapted from work that I've done or been a part of with JP before as well, but it applies to football really well, is robustness and efficiency. So like robust, are they adaptable? Are they resilient? Can they be well protected from injury? A lot of Frans's work is about not perfection, but stability, being what the body's interested in, and looking at like from concepts like dynamic systems theory, motor learning, stuff like this. Pieces of that like attractors and fluctuators, where attractors are real stable, economical components of movement that you want to encourage. And when you can have passive attractors, which is something that's a little bit more dangerous for the body, but easy to fall into, versus active attractors. So for example, like when you're running at speed, a passive attractor would be that you fall into deep dorsiflexion in it with your heel on the ground. You get, obviously, like that's easy to fall into because of the ankle joint itself, but it's not performance enhancing. It can be risky for injuries. Whereas an active one is that as soon as you hit the ground, your heel pops up very suddenly, and then you can have like your tissues, like your gastrocs, your quads and stuff like this, transporting energy and using elasticity a lot better. If you ask me like a broad question, like what you said there, you see how quickly it can go down like 7 different rabbit holes sorts of things. But
It's all good though.
yeah,
It's
getting
good.
back
It's good.
to what I said about robustness and efficiency, like if I look at that in one specific area of our guys this year, we'll, for example, look at them running, like the running motion. What is important there? What are the key attractors that we need in the running cycle for football? Can we identify them? Can we test them? And can we train to then improve them? And basically, if I break it down to something really simplistic and ignore the attractor based sort of training and talk and stuff like that, if we look at our guys run, we get like obviously our objective measures and stuff, which are quite traditional in S&C and in performance. But then we look at them, do movement analysis of them. Okay, do they have energy production or force production deficits or issues? Do they have more opportunities to store elastic energy and use their elasticity? Or can we make differences with error corrections or technical errors, like in their running? So obviously you have like technical errors in the running, and you have running style. Those things are two slightly different. Style, you don't need to modify so much. Technical errors can be injury risks, blah, 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 blah. And then we look at those 3 things, look at what the limiting factors are for them. More often than not in football, it's the technical errors and the error corrections in the running. So that's like your coordination and the stuff where Frans's methods come in really useful. And then we can allocate training resources to these guys to help improve their running efficiency, to help make them more robust, to get them faster, obviously, faster, more agile, etc., and to prevent them from getting injury. So we ideally have that performance improvement and injury prevention reduction like married together completely. And that's the biggest takeaway I can see from using Frans's work, is he is one of the first, or definitely one of the earliest people preaching that those 2 things need to be together. You know, injury prevention, and performance. The training for them needs to be cut from the same cloth. So yeah, just direct me in any direction, because I tend to ramble on a little bit, but.
No, that's good. That's great. So technical errors in football, from what you've seen, what are the biggest technical errors that you've come across that you could almost group quite a few people together in?
I'll start by saying that with football, you have ball control, and then you have body control. And because you have ball control, which is quite complex, the body control is very often poor. And that's stolen directly from Frans as well. And he uses slightly more harsh words, let's say, for the way that footballers move in general. But I completely agree with him. Like footballers on the whole are really, really poor movers. I give you an example, like for our guys, for example. It was the same when working in rugby with JP, with a lot of the different teams, like pelvic control in 3 planes of motion. So that's like inclusive, but not limited to like your hip lock, in particular, linking that pelvic control with your ankles. So the hips and the ankles, linking them together. Because if you know little bits and pieces of the hip locks, you know, most people know like snatches or wall slides or whatever else. If you're training those things over and over and over again, but there's no impacts or there's no linking with the hip, then in my opinion, it's a bit of a waste of time. That can be a massive boost to your running, both in acceleration and top speed. Then talking about like agility and change of direction and stuff like that, you have more abstract sort of principles like joint coupling and hip hinge, which is joint coupling. So for deceleration, and again in football, like it's just, if you were to watch even incredibly high level games like at European Championships at the moment, you'd quite often, if I sit with Frans and I watch a football game, he stares at the TV screen and he's like, look at these jokes, they've got terrible trunk control, the pelvis is all over the shop, they can't hinge and slow down properly. And if you can't hit the brakes properly, then you're probably going to be limited in your max speed as well. Or your speed that you can hit before you slow down.
So I'm just jumping off everything you're saying, because there's loads of things, avenues that could go down. So hip lock, that's something that you're seeing all the time. Give us the give us the overall benefits of doing that really well and why people would do it. And more interestingly for me, what are common errors that you see when people are trying to implement that?
Yeah, I would say hip lock kind of like almost got blown out of proportion because it kind of got like JP took it, used it really well with Japan rugby. It kind of blew out of proportion like what actually it is and like how much value you can get out of it. But like I said, I would think of it more in terms of like pelvic control in 3 planes of motion. So you have like your forward and backwards tilt, you have your upwards and downwards tilt, and you have your forwards and backwards rotation. And when, for example, I'm sure Frans, there's plenty of videos of him lecturing with this like all over the internet at the moment, especially during COVID lockdowns and stuff. But when you're moving at speed like that, you want an optimum combination of those 3 movements. For example, when you're striding or when you hit the ground and your hip recoils back up. And if any one of those movements like collapses too far, for example, too much forward collapse in the pelvis, then all the other 3 are compromised as well. And it's a little bit the same, like the linking of that pelvis or linking of the pelvis with the ankle, like what I spoke about before with collapsing into your heel, into deep dorsiflexion in running at speed. If you're training those hip locks and whatever else, and there is no linking of that with what's happening at the ankle, your transfer to actually your running is probably going to be a little bit limited.
So sorry, Leigh, how can people do that? How can people make that, ensure that link is happening?
Yeah, I think you probably need to have like what we do sometimes when Franz teaches on courses is he has these great lecture slides on like the filter of specificity. I would direct people probably to he's actually running more online courses and stuff now for like the details of that. But if you look at like some of the key elements of that specificity is like the motion of the limbs, obviously like how it looks, but what's happening a little bit deeper in terms of like intermuscular coordination, what's happening in individual muscles, which energy system is being used, the level of control of movement in the organism and stuff like this. So I would suggest, we're talking about something that could have so many different approaches, obviously, but if you're looking at improving someone's top speed, and for example, they're like hitting the ground and their free side of their pelvis is dropping quite a lot. Say, for example, on a forward hop test or a single leg counter movement jump, you see that, and you see when they land, you see this aggressive like dip of the free side of the pelvis. Then you might infer with or without degrees of certainty that then this hip lock can be useful, because then you want them to then land and not have this collapse on the free side of the pelvis, but recoil back up, for example, when they are running. And then sort of building your own exercises based off that, where you have the impact on the ground, but also that free side of the pelvis can't collapse. So it's probably worthwhile like pasting a couple of videos or something into this podcast. But you see, like, for example, you hop off from a box so I'm standing on a box here, you hop off from a box onto the other leg, and then you need to bring your leg up onto a higher box with the free leg. So left leg hits the ground, this right leg is free and in the air, and I need to touch my toe onto a box. Then that way, if I can organize my body to finish at that end point up on the box, if the box is high enough, I'll be up on my toe, on my standing leg, so I won't have stayed collapsed on my heel. And if I need to get my foot up onto this box, my free side of my pelvis wouldn't be collapsed down. It needs to raise up pretty quickly. And then you can add more and more pressure to that by time pressure, like force pressure. You start adding things like punches over your head with weights or aqua bags, stuff like this, perturbations, to then try to challenge the stability of that movement pattern more and more. But yeah, it's a bit difficult without visuals and talking about it. Talking about it over a podcast, obviously. But I would say a step back from that is like whatever sport people are working in, like what are the limiting factors of these athletes' movements,
So with the hip lock specifically, what common mistakes are you seeing people when they're trying to implement exercises?
I did a lot, like I said, I did a lot of stuff with JP working in rugby on it, and we've discussed it and discussed the progressions of it and evolution of it quite a bit. And I think people see like probably what I just spoke about, like a collapse of the free side of the pelvis. So it's like, okay, as soon as you land, you need to get it up, get it up, get it up. But to introduce another sort of element that Frans brought to the table in terms of motor learning, like clear intention, so knowledge of results versus knowledge of performance. People coaching hip locks and stuff that you see on social media, but also people in person and the way that they coach it is a lot of like explicit detail on, yeah, that one was really good, that one was really good. But on the one hand, I think if you execute something and you feel stable, good movement should feel good for the athlete themselves. And also you have a clear knowledge of the result. So for example, we do like step ups where they step up, they need to bring their free leg needs to step up over a hurdle and they finish on a box which is higher, like we discussed before, but they have like a small lane where they need to land their foot. That's a clear endpoint that they have to hit. If they have to hit this, then too many movements like in the transverse plane where they wobble or they collapse and they can't land there, they know that it's a non-successful result. Or also you change that intention to be, okay, I want to hit the box very softly, or I want to hit the box really hard. And if you, depending on the athlete and the interpretation and also the language, which I've come to figure out, if you, some people, if you say, okay, land on this box after the step up really hard, they will hover on above the box for a really long time, and then they hit hard on the box. And that's what you're looking for, to keep that free side of the pelvis up for as long as you can in that specific instance. But as I said before, I think there's too many things going on, like hip lock walks. I think maybe you've seen the marches, or like sliding your hip up and down a wall where there is no impact at the ankle, hence there is no time pressure, and it's way too many levels down in intensity from what it could be. You know what I mean? Same with the marches, like doing these marches and stuff like this. There's no problem to do it for a little bit of mobility or recovery or something like this, but if you're using it as a training tool, like you really need to start pushing your athletes or clients or whatever it is to their limit to figure out what the limiting factor is for them.
We'll come on to that in a second because it's something that's come up a couple of times on the podcast and been so regressed that it looks perfect to go on Instagram and on Twitter because it looks really good, but it's so regressed that it's not having this element of chaos, this element of ugliness. And I suppose with these things that people see online and then try to replicate in terms of Frans's work, that's maybe because maybe they're not fully understanding what the outcome is and what the result is, it gets regressed too much to feel comfortable. Yeah. They feel comfortable that it's doing something because they can see it looks nice,
yeah,
even though that chaotic environment is what is going to actually allow them to progress.
Yeah. I give you a better example. So, like you're working hip locks because you identify that somebody at top speed, you film them front on, you see that their pelvis is dropping one side. So that you're convinced that hip lock or your pelvic control is something that is an attractor that you can build with them, or it can be worked on with them. You go back into the gym and you start working on hip locks in one plane of motion. So it's like an attractor you have attractors at lots of different levels in the body. So like intramuscular level, intermuscular, spinal reflexes, and overall movement patterns. So like in running and stuff like this. So working on hip locks in, one plane of the pelvis, or like a wall slide, is in the frontal plane only. It's sort of like a slow and muscular work. So it's like breaking it down. So you regress it all the way. And then you do shitloads of those, excuse my language, and you expect that your running is going to improve. But then you could just go straight onto the road or road field. Yeah. And you could just run across and take a dumbbell in like one hand, and each stride that you take and you put your foot on the ground, you punch the dumbbell up above your head. And if you do this, then your stance leg needs to be super stable, and your other free hip will come up in response to that because it's like a reflex. So you punch the dumbbell above your head, just when your foot hits the ground, and you get a ground reaction force that usually forces you to scissor your legs back really quickly. Or you go onto the street nearby where I live, there's like some really old school Dutch roads, which is like wobbly and stuff like that. And you sprint along there, and either you'll collapse deep in your ankle, or you'll start to get a really active, stable ankle pattern where you push off and your heel touches the ground very, very briefly. And then you put yourself into an environment where your contextual patterns of movement, so you're running at top speed, gets put into an environment that is super challenging and, like you said, a bit more chaotic. And then you can watch what kinds of, if there is any stability that arises from that, or if there's collapse. You know what I mean? And then you're stressing at a much, much higher point, and you're potentially skipping 10 steps in between where you need to progress from hip locks in the frontal plane to then hip locks with impact to then hip locks with upper body rotation and stuff like this, when it may not be needed. And that's the key part with rehab, is that when you have, for example, an ACL injury or something like that, you do have to build up with those steps because tissue can't tolerate it yet. But in performance, yeah, you can jump up a bunch of steps, and you still might find that running with the dumbbell punching or running along the uneven pebbly road, someone still does it brilliantly. Then you need to find something new, a new stress.
I'd like to take that bit of conversation and take it into the agility angle, not just linear speed, but in agility as well. So just to combine, again, what we've chatted about for the first 30 minutes, how do you dissect what a player or group of players needs when it comes to developing agility, developing change direction, but also the perceptual stuff that comes along with agility?
Yeah. I suppose, firstly, like without individualization in team sports like football, there's always going to be a big limit on what you can achieve. So, of course, we have like little warm-up blocks at the moment where we call them movement skills, where it's 15 minutes, sometimes longer, sometimes broken up, where we're working on some of those key attractors, and the whole team does that. But unless you can get individual time, individual planning and goals set for what certain guys need, you're always going to be limited, right? To get there to that point to see what they need, then you need movement analysis. And ideally, you get movement analysis in context. So just yesterday, I was filming our goalkeeper in his goal because we were having a discussion the day before with him, his keeper coach, and myself about the set position for goalkeepers when they're about to make a save or a jump. Looking at this is, I think, super important because you see everything in context. You see how he's actually moving in a game or in a game on the training pitch. We also do, obviously, like bouts of testing. So choose whichever test you want and for whatever reasons you want. 5 meter, 10 meter, 20 meter, 30 meter, 505, agility T-test, whatever it is. Then you can use your movement analysis there. And probably a good starting point would be, a 5 meter acceleration or a 10 meter acceleration. Then from there, you use that movement analysis. Again, you remove a little bit of the context because they're not playing football, but you still get high intensity actions, which you can break down a little bit. Then if you, of course, have the time and resources, you can start to look at, okay, this guy is brilliant at 10 meter accelerations. He's very quick. Maybe we can look at change of direction as an issue. This other guy, he's super slow. He collapses in his ankles. He's got a round back when he accelerates, and he's got slow times. We need to work on his speed before we start to look at change of direction. Like I said, individualizing that process is key, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower and a lot of hours at the computer. But that's how we go about it here, and that's from Frans and from JP, especially the way in which I think sports needs to go in the future, especially sports like field sports like football.
So when it comes to analysing that video, whether it be in a 5 meter acceleration, 10 meter change direction test, whatever it is there any areas, and I'm just trying to second guess what people are thinking. Okay, I've got this movement, whether it be, like I say, 10 meter sprint, 5 meter sprint, there's lots going on. No matter how much you slow it down, there's lots going on. Is there any specific tips that you would give people to focus on certain areas that are common errors in football that you can potentially almost tick off? Like where you would look first, what would be your first go-to when analysing movement in football?
It's a tricky one because the reality is that movement analysis is not for everybody. Someone like Franz does it like this and it is brilliant at it. I'm certainly working on it, but I don't have all the answers, and it has limitations. It's very subjective. You might say something very different to me, and we can argue the back and forth on it. But our backup our fallback to that is the rest of our objective testing. So, for example, you look at a guy running at top speed, you look at the left and the right side differences in ground contact, or how quickly the heel leaves the ground, or whatever else. The backup to that is, okay, his single leg RSI in the gym on left leg is terrible, and that we see the same in his running. And the medical says that he has injuries on his left side. So then, okay, we have hardware issues here. We also have coordination issues in his running. We can then begin to say with, again, not certainty, but with more confidence that this is potentially what he needs to work on, and formulate a plan from there. And it's going back to the movement analysis. It's a little bit like when you do, I use an injury example. When you get an injury, typically, I assume in the UK it's the same, but typically you get on the treatment bed, someone assesses you with range of motion and clinical tests and whatnot. Then you might go with the same person into a gym or a certain area where you do single leg squatting, deadlifting, hopping, functional tests, stuff like this. These are also somewhat subjective, and then you might go to a performance coach and you do performance testing, which is anything from squat jumps to, triple hops to broad jumps or whatever else. They give you a piece of information, and then you accumulate these pieces of information, but quite often then you never look at them moving in context. So whether they're in pain or not, obviously if they can't run and you need to analyze them, then that's tricky. But if you can look at them in context first and then go back and plug in what you're interested in, I think it saves a lot of time, and it's quite different from the norm at the moment. Your main question in that, I'm coming back to it, was what things people can look out for. Yeah, as I said, it's not for the faint-hearted. Like, you got to spend a lot of hours developing that skill set a little bit. People like, for example, like Vern Gambetta. I was on a podcast with him, and he was talking about like the coach's eye, and a lot of coaches just know these things and know it well. I'm all for that too. Like, if you just have an intuitive, I know this guy needs more lean in his acceleration, or I know this guy needs whatever it is in their top speed, or they change the direction. Yeah, if that's the way you want to go, then that's great. We build little templates so that it's not just me telling everyone what it is. They can also look at the template, look at step-by-step progressions, for example, for acceleration, make their own remarks, and we can come together and sit and talk about it. I would say if you, the starting point for it is like to see a hell of a lot of athletes move. So, if you want to get good at acceleration analysis, like start to see heaps of people doing accelerations. That's what I'm in the middle of at the moment, based off Franz's advice, and starting real basic from there. If anyone wants any sort of like tips on like, oh, I'm looking at this guy accelerating or top speed, like what are 3 points that I can start with for analysis? Like, yeah, feel free to drop me a message and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you already hear from me babbling on so much that this stuff is complex, and the devil is in the details quite a lot. So, you can't just like film someone, get 3 points, and say, yeah, I've done a movement analysis. But yeah, that's probably where you need to start as well.
Them templates. Talking about the templates.
So we have like start and acceleration. We have top speed. We have change of direction, like for a 505. And they're just little like check boxes. So things that obviously it comes off the back of the work of Frans and Toon Thomason in particular, who are the movement analysis go-to guys. Like, we do that as consulting for sports clubs and stuff like that through Frans Bosch systems. But I built it for our teams so that if I have 20 guys at once, I can just whiz through real quick and say, okay, on the first steps, I'm looking for this. No, yes. On the second steps, this. No, yes. It's just like making things a little bit more efficient for me if I need to look at 5 guys in 2 days or something like that. I also encourage people to make your own templates like that, because just because what I see based off my biases that I get from Frans, JP, and Toon and stuff doesn't mean that that should be what everyone else looks for. You know what I mean? But at least then you add a little bit of like, at least you document your subjectivity, and then you can add the objectivity in the gym or in other testing, or in your testing numbers. Like you still have 10 meter time if you time it with timing lights,
I'm going to stitch you up here a bit because I know didn't tell you I was going to ask you about this, but can the templates, so for an acceleration, for example, and I know you haven't got this in front of you, but can you give us a little bit of a rundown on what that template may look like, and those tick boxes that you're trying to get a bit of a picture of what these guys are moving like?
Yeah. So for example, like start and acceleration, if you have it, you can do this to varying levels, obviously, but you have start and acceleration, you have the video, you can take snapshots of the video. We also have an app that we developed with Frans Bosch systems for that as well. Just takes really quick snapshots. I think it's like $1 on the App Store or something like that, but I use it to death. I'm pretty sure JP uses it as well. And then we just have a little box, and it will be like different step approaches to acceleration. So I don't want to give away all of Frans's hard-earned work, but for example, like the first step in that is like balance at toe-off position. So like first step, does your swing knee keep rising until toe-off, or does it drop before that? As an example, like what is the position of the swing knee as they swing it through? When they hit the ground, do they have good stiffness at mid-stance, as in the other leg is not dropping real deep? Do they have a round back and too much or not enough forward lean? Those are some examples of check boxes.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like it. Got to protect that IP.
100%. Especially when it's not your own.
Exactly. Too right. So I'd like to ask you about, again, coming from Frans, not the latest book, but the book before, about the transfer of traditional strength training to sport.
Sorry, Rob.
Just going back
to that. If anyone's really interested in like those movement analysis and step-by-step blocks and stuff like that, Frans and Toon are running online courses in Holland and also international courses. As far as like COVID and lockdowns and stuff goes, I have no part to play in it and I earn zero money from it. But I would, if someone is interested in the stuff that we're talking about, yeah, there is no better course to recommend. But you have to understand, like I said, it's going to be a start of a work in progress where you start to see some things, you go away, you see 50 athletes run, and then you develop your skill set a little bit. So just a little selfless plug.
Love that. Thanks, mate. So transfer of traditional strength training for sport, so to sport. What's your thoughts around what the traditional model of strength and conditioning looks like versus that is encouraged or believed in by Frans? Where do you sit?
Yeah, I'm a half because I'm a student of Frans's, but I'm also a student of someone like John Pryor as well, who uses a mixture of both, and will tell you himself, through experimenting on numerous different sports and athletes and whatnot. I believe in the sport that I'm working in now, having also experimented on myself, that traditional strength training, like heavy lifting and stuff like that, we don't do much of it. And I don't recommend it for our guys at the club. And I think you start to see a bit more research now on, for example, like maximal strength and heavy lifting, that it can have a negative effect on your speed if that's what you're training for, which more often than not for us, it is. It also has other effects as well, like heavy neural load and DOMs and muscle soreness and stuff that a lot of young players that come, or new players to us, aren't used to, and can sabotage the rest of their training a little bit. In sports like rugby and contact sports like use jiu-jitsu, for example, or grappling, like I haven't played rugby, but like jiu-jitsu or like rolling, you go wrestling with someone like this, and you really feel the need to improve things like your grip or like your pull or your pushing, like your maximal strength. And I think in those contexts, certainly traditional strength work and maybe a mixture of the coordination based stuff is more helpful. In sports like rugby, where you're contact heavy, you certainly have a need for protective hypertrophy, because you need body mass to run into body mass, basically. But yeah, as far as we go, I think and as far as the transfer to skills of movement, as in like what we were talking about before, acceleration, deceleration, top speed, lateral movement, changes of direction, cuts, curves, all these things. I think it is, for the most part, limited. But then again, like I said before, when we're looking at an athlete in a nutshell, do they have options for better force production, better use of elasticity, or coordination and error correction in their running movement? And there's certainly a place for all three, and there's certainly times in our squad with our boys where we've used all three different elements.
Has that come into conflict with any players that have come across to you at
Yeah.
the club? Yeah. Okay. How do you deal with
100%.
that?
I think on like what I said right at the start is you need player buy-in, because without that, like any training approach is going to probably fall flat on its face. I think it's that old saying, like the training program is only as good as it's executed, or like a shitty training program executed 100 times is going to be better than the one that's executed 10 times. And I really believe in that. But we have guys who like want to lift heavy, want to feel a little bit of soreness the next day. Just depends, I think, on your relationship with them a little bit. Like, for the most part, we have a great group of boys, actually, that I really get along with, all of them, without fail for any of them, which is quite rare in any sporting team. But I have a pretty good relationship with them that we can sit with them and say, listen, I don't know that this is going to be your best way forward for improving this, and relate it always back to their goals. But then again, like, if some guys like to, do some heavy rocket squatting or trap bar deadlifts or something like that, like, if it's the right time and it's the right dose, I'll jump in and do it with them, But if they feel that it's what they need, or it's what they like to do with their body, I think that can supersede what someone like me wants for them, or is recommending for them, for sure.
So on that same line of question, I guess, exercise specificity, again, coming from Frans's book, single leg Olympic lifting derivatives. I know that's something that's quite talked about quite a lot when Frans's systems and methodologies come into conversation. What's your feelings around that?
We don't use them very much at the moment with the team. I think it's something where it is a little bit more detailed, and to execute it in, for example, team gym sessions is quite tough. The only person I've really seen do it quite well is JP, and he was doing it via things like doing it with plates or doing it with Aqua bags, where the intention is really clear. Get the plate up right above your head. Get your body as tall as you possibly can be. So, like, 2 cues. Your end point, and your knowledge of result if you can hold it up there for 2 seconds. But yeah, doing it in big groups is tough. I do think it has quite a bit of value. So if I'm with like 1 or 2 guys that I can spend a little bit more time watching them, not cueing them, but watching them, I'll do it. But rehab is the big one where I've used it the most. And that's because of the intimacy in the setting that you're doing it in. But it's also like how you can manipulate the context that you're using those single-legged ollie lift variations and stuff. So, for example, you have the classic clean to a box. I think, like what we spoke about before, it's missing a clear intention, enough overload, and knowledge of result, which kind of goes in with the first one. But say, for example, you have a calf injury, you can do like a single leg clean where you do it, hold the bar at your knees, drag it up really slowly, and drag it up as slow as you can, and then clean the bar up with one leg. And the higher and higher the bar goes up your leg, the shorter and shorter amount of range you have to produce the forces necessary to clean the bar up with one leg. Hence the calf, the gastroc, and rec fem and its partners and the quads and stuff need to work much more explosively in a shorter range of motion. And then when you get further on down the track with a calf like that, you can do things where you hop off a plate, hit the ground, and then do a clean immediately. So then you add impacts to it, and then you can start to add layers a little bit. But yeah, I think for the most part, heavily bastardized element of Frans's work. And yeah, I've been lucky that I've been able to spend time with people like Frans and JP, where I've got a good understanding of it. And being able to implement it in a rehab setting, with one or two guys and sort of refine it and see the responses and stuff like that.
You mentioned the aqua bag there, and there seemed to be a time where every time you went on social media, there was aqua bags being thrown around all over the place. Again, I'd love to get your thoughts on where they should be used, where they shouldn't be used, why they're used in the first place, because, like I said, people are using them for everything going. So, yeah, maybe first, why people may want to use them. Secondly, common errors for people that do choose to use them.
Yeah, I'm probably guilty of the aqua bag plug myself. A lot of my mates back home take the piss out of me for that a lot. But I really like them. I like them because I trained with them myself for long periods. And I like them because they're bloody robust, like little tools. And you can travel. Like I just packed 10 of them today into our van for a training camp next week. They're easily manipulatable with the load. But the thing, obviously, for me, that using aqua bags is you can take it into the setting of the gym. You can take it out onto the field. You can take it elsewhere with you. And it makes something more closed skill immediately more open skill, because you have the movement of the water, shocks around. The body perceives this as like external perturbation, basically, that it needs to cope with. And then this adds more external variability to your movement and makes the environment more chaotic. Hence, the body needs to become more stable for that. In particular, like you look at something like the functions of your core and trunk, especially in sports like football for us here, and you look at like the abdominals and their design structurally and probably what they are used for is obviously like have heavy bracing and co-contractions for contact and stuff like that. But you also have like absorbing big external forces and still being able to stay within an optimum length so that you can brace, absorb those forces, keep going or push back or whatever it is, and maintain control of your pelvis, which is like the launch platform for the running cycle. Absorb external forces or absorb internal forces. Say, for example, when you're running, your pelvis is in position and your hip flexors are pulling hard on your pelvis. Your abdominals still need to be able to stretch and hold still to allow your pelvis to be steady and allow your hip flexors to do work and to pull your knees up hard and to run hard too. And the absorbing big external forces is also where the aqua bag comes in. So we do heaps of things where we're in different like leaning positions and punching, splashing the bag. The cue is to splash the bag as loud as you can, make as big a sound as you can, but splash out, punch to different targets and stuff like this. That's not to say we don't do, like heavy bracing, core co-contractions work and stuff like that. We do, like hanging work, planking, stuff like this, still with either high load or lighter loads and high time pressure or force pressure. But for that sort of stuff, yeah, the aqua bags are great, because you also see as a player, okay, I'm doing things inside where like I'm in a sit-up position, I'm leaning back and I'm punching in different directions. And then I go out on the field, I'm running a straight line and I'm punching in different directions. And there's a little bit there, some familiarity in how you progress from the gym to the field, and that those things are linked, because they should be, right? I don't want to like smash anyone's business or products or anything, but like if you're like shuffling around with mini bands around your knees and then you go outside and it feels absolutely, no connection to that whatsoever inside. I'm not saying you can't do that. Of course you can sometimes for different reasons. But for me, that's been personally my experiences of linking the training feel for the players and also the players that you work with. You say like, remember inside when we did this punching with the bags and stuff, now we're going to do the running version of it. Okay, I feel you. I get you. I got to splash it loud, blah, blah, blah. So yeah. And there's a lot of hate on it out there, especially, but someone like JP, again, I keep harping on about him, but the guy has used those products to such great effect in field sport, a field sport like rugby. Yeah, if you see the guy in action, yeah, you'll be running to the Aquabag web shop.
So what's the biggest mistake when people use aqua bags?
I think maybe just throwing it in there like for the sake of it. So like instability for the sake of instability, like using unstable loads and stuff like that, whether it be dangling bands off plates or having someone manually shock you or something like that, needs to challenge the stability of the system and make the environment, like we said before, more chaotic. Body goes more simple. So if that is the case, then yeah. But if you're doing something like strength wise and you're looking for force production or energy production or elastic energy return, and you're just throwing an aqua bag in there, and the force production or the bounce in a hop or something like that suffers because the aqua bag is there, then yeah, what's the point of it? You know what I mean? So yeah, that would probably be the biggest thing. But to be honest with you, I'm not for, even though you or my mates might think at home, I'm not searching hashtag aquabags on Instagram every night and saying like, all right, what's everyone up to? There's heaps of it in all the stuff that I share, but for the most part, when I implement them in sessions, almost all the time, if you were to come in and stop me in the middle of the session, be like, what's the purpose of this movement? What's the purpose of the aqua bag? I can give you a straight answer, or I can give a player a straight answer, which I think is also important.
Absolutely. Good man. Right, mate. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Just want to do a little roundup and ask you to tell people where people can get to know more about you, more about your work. This is your time to have a couple of plugs in there.
This is the plug time. Yeah, I'm not super active on like social media, I would say. Mainly I just post clips of stuff of what I'm up to lately on Instagram, so people can find me on there. And Twitter, I have an account, but I don't use it very much. I would say, like, content-wise, if people are interested in following, as in not asking questions, but just following and stuff, Speed Power Play on YouTube. JP and I upload, or at least attempt to upload when we're not super busy, some regular content on there. And we have an app that we developed a few years ago, which if you want to delve into fundamentals of like core trunk strength and hip lock and pelvic control, then there's 2 modules on there. But otherwise, yeah, if like I said a couple of times, I tend to just babble on. But if anyone wants to make sense of anything that I said, I'm more than happy to answer anyone's questions or whatever.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice there. Definitely doing yourself a disservice. So I won't worry about that.
Definitely babble on. I'm good for a babble.
Yeah, no, like I say, definitely doing yourself a disservice. I won't worry about it too much of you babbling. It's good, great stuff. So thank you very much for coming on. Thank you very much for putting up my stalking over the last couple of weeks. And good luck at camp, good luck at pre-season, and good luck with your first game in Europe in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it a lot. It was good to be here. Hopefully
Pleasure.
we can do it again.
Thanks, pal. Speak soon.
All right, mate.
Bye, mate.